The grand ballroom of Valdoria Palace sparkled under the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. King Edmund stood at the center of the opulent room, his deep blue ceremonial robes flowing around him as he prepared to make an announcement that would shake the very foundations of the royal court. The assembled nobles, diplomats, and court officials held their breath in anticipation, unaware that this moment would ignite a firestorm of jealousy and political intrigue. Queen Isabel stood to his right, her emerald green gown complementing her carefully styled auburn hair. She had been by Edmund's side for 15 years, weathering countless storms and supporting him through the most challenging periods of his reign. Tonight she expected to finally receive the recognition she had long deserved. The whispers in the court had been growing louder for months about the king's intention to bestow upon her the prestigious Order of the Golden Crown, an honor that would cement her status as not just his wife, but as a true partner in ruling the kingdom. On the king's left stood Princess Catherine, his daughter-in-law married to Crown Prince Alexander for just 3 years. Catherine had captured the hearts of the people with her charitable work and genuine warmth. She moved through the crowds of common folk with an ease that seemed natural, stopping to speak with children, visiting hospitals, and championing causes for the less fortunate. Her popularity had grown exponentially, sometimes even overshadowing that of the royal family's more established members. The tension in the room was palpable as King Edmund raised his hand for silence. "My dear subjects and honored guests," his voice boomed across the ballroom carrying the authority of 3 decades on the throne. "Tonight we gather to celebrate not just our kingdom's prosperity, but the individuals who have contributed to its greatness through their unwavering dedication and service." Queen Isabel's heart raced with anticipation. She had sacrificed so much for the crown, had stood by Edmund through scandals that would have destroyed lesser marriages, and had worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy's image. The Order of the Golden Crown would be more than just a title. It would be validation of her years of service and a signal to the court that she remained Edmund's most trusted advisor throughout our history, the king continued. "The Order of the Golden Crown has been reserved for those who embody the very best of our nation's values. Tonight, I have the honor of bestowing this sacred recognition upon someone whose dedication to the people of Valdoria has been nothing short of extraordinary." The courtiers leaned forward, many assuming they knew who would receive this honor. After all, Queen Isabel had been the obvious choice for months. She had recently completed a successful diplomatic mission to 3 neighboring kingdoms, securing trade agreements that would benefit Valdoria for generations to come. Her efforts had been praised in Parliament and celebrated in the press, but as King Edmund's eyes swept across the room, they settled not on his wife, but on Princess Catherine. "It is my great pleasure to announce that the Order of the Golden Crown shall be bestowed upon Her Royal Highness, Princess Catherine, in recognition of her outstanding humanitarian efforts and her remarkable ability to connect with people from all walks of life." The ballroom erupted in applause, but Queen Isabel felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Her carefully composed smile faltered for just a moment that several keen observers in the court noticed and would later discuss in hushed conversations. Catherine looked genuinely surprised, her hand flying to her heart as she processed the unexpected honor. As the crowd cheered, Queen Isabel's mind raced through a whirlwind of emotions. Embarrassment burned in her chest as she realized how publicly she had been passed over. She had confided in several close friends that she expected to receive this honor, and now she would have to face their questions and perhaps their pity. Anger followed quickly behind the embarrassment. Anger at Edmund for not consulting her, anger at Catherine for somehow managing to upstage her once again, and anger at herself for assuming her position guaranteed her recognition. Princess Catherine stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly with emotion as she addressed the crowd. "Your Majesty, I am deeply humbled by this honor. I accept it not just for myself, but on behalf of all the volunteers and organizations who work tirelessly every day to make our kingdom a better place for everyone." Her gracious response only made Queen Isabel's frustration worse. Catherine's humility and genuine surprise made it impossible to cast her as calculating or scheming. The younger woman had simply been herself, kind, dedicated, and authentic, and that authenticity had won her the kingdom's highest civilian honor. As the evening continued with dancing and celebration, Queen Isabel maintained her royal composure. accepting congratulations for Catherine's achievement and smiling for the photographers. But inside she was planning. This slight could not go unanswered, and she would need to carefully consider her next moves to restore her position in the court's hierarchy. The seeds of conflict had been planted in the glittering ballroom of Valdoria Palace, and they would soon grow into a drama that would captivate the kingdom and threaten the very stability of the royal family. The morning after the grand ceremony dawned gray and stormy, matching the mood that had settled over the royal residence. Queen Isabel had barely slept, her mind churning with thoughts of the previous evening's humiliation. She sat in her private study, still in her silk nightgown and robe, staring at the morning newspapers spread across her mahogany desk. Every headline celebrated Princess Catherine's unexpected honor, and several articles speculated about what this meant for the balance of power within the royal family. "Catherine captures crown's highest honor," read the main headline of the Valdoria Tribune. Below it, a photograph showed the princess in her stunning silver gown, beaming as King Edmund placed the golden medallion around her neck. Queen Isabel's image appeared in the background, her smile looking forced and strained now that she knew the truth behind it. A soft knock interrupted her bitter thoughts. "Come in," she called, not bothering to look up from the newspapers. Lady Margaret, her closest friend and lady-in-waiting for over a decade, entered quietly. Margaret had been with Isabel through every triumph and setback, and she could read the Queen's moods better than anyone. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss what happened last night." Isabel finally lifted her eyes, and Margaret was shocked to see tears threatening to spill over. In all their years together, she had rarely seen the Queen show such vulnerability. "What is there to discuss, Margaret? My husband has made his preference clear. Apparently, 15 years of loyalty and sacrifice mean less than 3 years of hand-waving at orphanages and hospitals." Margaret approached carefully, settling into the chair across from Isabel's desk. "Your Majesty, I think you may be viewing this too personally. The King's decision was likely based on political considerations. Princess Catherine's popularity with the common people has been remarkable, and this honor will strengthen the monarchy's connection to the citizens." "Political considerations?" Isabel's voice rose sharply. "Everything I have done for this kingdom has been a political consideration. When Edmund was criticized for being too traditional, who convinced him to modernize the royal protocols? When the northern provinces threatened rebellion over tax increases, who personally traveled there and negotiated a peaceful resolution? When his own brother challenged his claim to the throne, who stood by his side and helped expose the conspiracy?" The Queen stood abruptly, pacing to the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens. Below she could see the groundskeepers tending to the rose bushes, their simple lives unburdened by the complex machinations of royal politics. "I have been the power behind this throne for 15 years, Margaret. I have sacrificed my own ambitions, my own dreams to support Edmund's reign, and what do I have to show for it? I watch a young woman who has been part of this family for barely 3 years receive the recognition that should have been mine." Margaret chose her words carefully. "Perhaps this is an opportunity to demonstrate your grace and wisdom. The court is watching to see how you will respond to this situation. If you handle it with dignity, it could actually strengthen your position in the long run." But Isabel was beyond listening to advice about dignity and grace. She turned from the window, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, Margaret. I have been gracious and dignified for 15 years, and where has it gotten me? It's time for a different approach." Before Margaret could respond, another knock echoed through the study. This time it was one of the palace pages announcing that King Edmund requested an audience with the Queen in his private office. Isabel's expression hardened. "Tell His Majesty I will be there presently." 20 minutes later, Queen Isabel entered the king's office, her composure restored and her appearance immaculate. She had chosen a deep burgundy dress that she knew Edmund admired, and her hair was styled in the elegant updo that had become her signature look. But beneath the polished exterior, her anger simmered just below the surface. King Edmund looked up from the stack of diplomatic correspondence on his desk, his expression wary. He had been married to Isabel long enough to recognize the signs of her displeasure, even when she was trying to hide it. "Isabel, please sit down. I think we need to discuss last night." She remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her. "Indeed we do. I trust you've seen the morning papers. They're quite enthusiastic about your choice to honor Catherine." Edmund set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. I know you're upset, and I understand why. But Isabel, this decision wasn't made lightly. The Order of the Golden Crown needed to go to someone who could represent the modern face of our monarchy. Catherine's work with the people has been extraordinary, and her popularity. Her popularity, Isabel interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. Yes, let's discuss her popularity. Do you think it's entirely natural, Edmund? Or perhaps it's been carefully cultivated by certain members of your staff who see an opportunity to advance their own positions by backing the rising star? The king's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you implying? I'm implying nothing. I'm stating facts. Your press secretary, Lord Harrison, has been feeding stories to the media about Catherine's charitable work while somehow managing to overlook my diplomatic achievements. Your chief advisor, Sir William, has been arranging photo opportunities for Catherine while my schedule has been filled with behind-the-scenes work that generates no publicity. This honor didn't fall into Catherine's lap by accident, Edmund. It was orchestrated. Edmund stood, his own anger beginning to rise. That's enough, Isabel. Catherine earned this honor through her own merits. Your jealousy is clouding your judgment. The word jealousy hit Isabel like a physical blow. In their 15 years of marriage, Edmund had never spoken to her with such dismissiveness. Jealousy? You think this is about jealousy? This is about respect, Edmund. This is about recognizing the contributions of the woman who has stood by your side through every crisis this kingdom has faced. And you have been recognized. Edmund shot back. You are the Queen of Valdoria. You wear the crown. Isn't that recognition enough? Isabel stared at her husband for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time how wide the gulf between them had become. Apparently not, she said quietly. I see now where I stand in your priorities. I won't make the mistake of assuming otherwise again. She turned to leave, but Edmund's voice stopped her at the door. Isabel, don't make this into something it's not. One honor doesn't diminish everything you've contributed to this kingdom. Without turning around, she replied, No, Edmund, but it shows me everything I need to know about what my contributions mean to you. The door closed behind her, with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than any slam could have. The battle lines had been drawn in the palace of Valdoria, and the kingdom was about to witness a royal conflict unlike anything in its history. Word of the confrontation between King Edmund and Queen Isabel spread through the palace corridors faster than wildfire. By midday, every servant, advisor, and court official knew that something significant had shifted in the royal family's dynamics. The staff moved more quietly than usual, sensing the tension that now permeated every room and hallway of the ancient palace. Princess Catherine found herself in an impossible position. She had genuinely been surprised by the honor, and had no desire to be caught in the middle of a family conflict. Sitting in her private apartment with Crown Prince Alexander, she nervously twisted the golden medallion between her fingers, already regretting its weight around her neck. I never asked for this, she said to her husband, her voice heavy with worry. I had no idea that accepting this honor would cause such problems between your parents. Maybe I should return it. Tell your father that I don't deserve it. Prince Alexander, a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor inherited from his father, shook his head firmly. Catherine, you earned this recognition through your own hard work and dedication. The problems between my parents go much deeper than one ceremony. Don't let their issues make you doubt your own worth. But your mother looked so hurt, Alexander. I saw her face when your father made the announcement. I've never seen Queen Isabel look so shocked and disappointed. She's been nothing but kind to me since our wedding, and now I feel like I've stolen something that rightfully belonged to her. Alexander moved to sit beside his wife, taking her hands in his. My mother is a complicated woman, Catherine. She's incredibly intelligent and capable, but she's also deeply ambitious. She expected this honor because she's been positioning herself for it for months. That doesn't mean you didn't deserve it. Before Catherine could respond, a sharp knock interrupted their conversation. Lady Margaret entered, her expression serious and formal. Your Royal Highnesses, Queen Isabel requests Princess Catherine's presence in her private drawing room. Catherine's stomach dropped. She exchanged a worried glance with Alexander, who squeezed her hand reassuringly. I'll come with you, he offered. No, Catherine said quietly, standing and smoothing her skirt. If Queen Isabel wants to speak with me alone, then that's what I should do. We're family, and families work through their problems together. As Catherine followed Lady Margaret through the winding palace corridors, she tried to prepare herself for what might be a very difficult conversation. Queen Isabel had always been cordial and welcoming, but Catherine was not naive about the Queen's reputation for political maneuvering and strategic thinking. Queen Isabel was waiting in her drawing room, seated elegantly in a high-backed chair upholstered in royal blue velvet. She had changed from her morning attire into a formal afternoon dress of deep purple, and her jewelry included several pieces that emphasized her status as queen. The message was clear. This was not a casual, friendly chat between family members. "Catherine, please sit down," Isabel said, her voice perfectly controlled and polite. "I believe we have some things to discuss." Catherine took the seat across from the Queen, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. "Your Majesty, if this is about last night's ceremony, I want you to know that I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Isabel interrupted smoothly. "I don't blame you for accepting an honor that was offered to you. That would be foolish. What I want to discuss is what happens next." The younger woman waited. Unsure of what the Queen meant, Isabel continued, her tone remaining pleasant but carrying an undertone that made Catherine's skin prickle. "You see, Catherine, being part of this family requires more than just charitable work and public appearances. It requires understanding the delicate balance of relationships, loyalties, and obligations that keep our monarchy stable. Last night's ceremony has upset that balance." "I don't understand what you're asking of me," Catherine said carefully. "I'm not asking anything of you yet," Isabel replied with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm simply explaining how things work in this family. When one person's star rises too quickly, it can create shadows where there weren't any before. Those shadows can become problematic for everyone involved." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you threatening me?" Queen Isabel laughed, but it was a cold sound. "Threatening you? Heavens no. I'm educating you. You're young, Catherine, and you've been protected from the more complicated aspects of royal life. But that protection can't last forever. Sooner or later, you'll need to understand that every action has consequences, and every alliance comes with costs." Before Catherine could respond, the drawing room door burst open without ceremony. Crown Prince Alexander strode in, his face flushed with anger. "Mother, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Isabel's composure never wavered. "I'm having a conversation with my daughter-in-law." "Is that not allowed?" "Not when that conversation involves veiled threats," Alexander shot back. "Catherine, are you all right?" Catherine nodded, though she was clearly shaken. Queen Isabel was just explaining some things about royal protocol. "My son," Isabel said, standing gracefully, "you might want to consider whose side you're taking in this situation. Family loyalty is a valuable thing, but it shouldn't be given blindly." Alexander's eyes flashed with anger. "My loyalty is to my wife and to what's right. If you can't accept that Catherine deserved the honor she received, then perhaps you need to examine your own motivations." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Queen Isabel studied her son for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "Very well, Alexander. I see where you stand. I hope for all our sakes that your choice doesn't come back to haunt you." Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, King Edmund was dealing with the political fallout of his decision. Sir William, his chief advisor, sat across from the king's desk with a worried expression on his weathered face. "Your Majesty, I've been receiving calls all morning from members of Parliament and the press. There are questions about the Queen's absence from today's scheduled appearances, and rumors are already circulating about tension within the royal family." Edmund rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. "What kind of rumors?" "The usual speculation about marital problems, questions about the succession, concerns about stability. Nothing too damaging yet, but these things have a way of growing if they're not addressed quickly." The king was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What's your assessment of the situation, William?" Sir William chose his words carefully. "Honestly, sir, I think you may have underestimated Queen Isabel's reaction to your decision. She's not someone who accepts public slights gracefully, and she has her own network of supporters within the court and government. If she decides to make this into a larger conflict, it could become very problematic." King Edmund stared out the window at the palace gardens, where tourists were taking photographs near the famous fountain. Their simple joy seemed very far away from the complex web of relationships and rivalries that defined his daily life. Do you think I made the wrong choice, William? I think you made the choice you believed was best for the kingdom, Sir William replied diplomatically. But sometimes the right choice for the kingdom isn't the right choice for the family, and vice versa. As the afternoon wore on, the battle lines within the royal family became increasingly clear. Queen Isabel had begun reaching out to her own allies within the court, while Princess Catherine found herself reluctantly at the center of a conflict she never wanted. Crown Prince Alexander stood firmly by his wife's side, but his loyalty came at the cost of his relationship with his mother. The palace staff whispered about choosing sides, and even the kitchen servants knew that something fundamental had changed in the royal household. The question was no longer whether there would be a conflict, but how far it would go and who would still be standing when it was over. 3 days after the ceremony, the conflict that had been simmering within the palace walls erupted into the public eye with devastating force. It started with a seemingly innocent interview that Queen Isabel had agreed to weeks earlier with Victoria Sterling, the kingdom's most respected royal correspondent. What was supposed to be a routine discussion about upcoming royal events became a carefully orchestrated revelation that sent shockwaves through the media and beyond. Victoria Sterling sat across from Queen Isabel in the palace's formal interview room, the cameras rolling as they discussed various charitable initiatives and upcoming state visits. The Queen appeared composed and regal as always, but those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tightness around her eyes, the way she held her shoulders just a fraction higher than usual. "Your Majesty," Victoria said as the interview neared its end, "there's been quite a lot of excitement about Princess Catherine's recent honor. The Order of the Golden Crown is such a prestigious recognition. You must be very proud of your daughter-in-law." Queen Isabel paused for just a moment, long enough for the cameras to capture the subtle shift in her expression. "Of course I'm happy for Catherine. She's a lovely young woman who brings fresh energy to our family, though I must admit I was somewhat surprised by the timing of the recognition." Victoria leaned forward slightly, sensing an opportunity. "Surprised by the timing?"
"Well," Isabel said, her voice carefully measured, "the Order of the Golden Crown has traditionally been awarded to individuals after years, sometimes decades, of service to the kingdom."
"Catherine has been with us for 3 years, which is wonderful, but it does represent a departure from historical precedent." The interviewer's eyes sharpened. "Are you suggesting that Princess Catherine wasn't ready for such an honor?" Queen Isabel smiled, but it was the kind of smile that could cut glass. "I'm not suggesting anything, Victoria. I'm simply observing that the monarchy has certain traditions and protocols that have served us well for centuries. When we make dramatic departures from those traditions, it's worth examining the reasons and potential consequences." Within hours of the interview's broadcast that evening, every major news outlet in the kingdom was analyzing Queen Isabel's comments. The headlines were brutal. Queen questions Catherine's honor, royal family divided, and most damaging of all, Isabel's jealousy exposed. In her apartment, Princess Catherine watched the coverage with growing horror. The news programs were dissecting every word of the Queen's interview, with royal experts offering opinions about what it meant for the stability of the monarchy. Some defended Catherine, calling her a breath of fresh air who had earned her recognition through genuine service. Others suggested that perhaps the Queen had a point about tradition and experience. "This is a disaster," Catherine said to Prince Alexander, who paced angrily in front of their television. "She's made it look like I'm some kind of undeserving interloper who manipulated her way into an honor I didn't earn." Alexander's face was dark with fury. "My mother has crossed a line that she can't uncross. To air family business publicly like this, it's not just inappropriate, it's dangerous for all of us." The phone in their apartment rang constantly with requests for interviews and statements. Princess Catherine's private secretary fielded dozens of calls from reporters wanting her response to the Queen's comments. The pressure was mounting for Catherine to defend herself publicly, but she was reluctant to escalate the conflict further. Meanwhile, King Edmund was in emergency meetings with his advisors trying to contain the damage. The palace had received hundreds of calls from concerned citizens, members of parliament and foreign diplomatic missions, all wanting clarification about the apparent rift in the royal family. "Your Majesty," Sir William said, his face grave, "we need to issue a statement immediately. The speculation is getting out of control, and it's starting to affect public confidence in the monarchy." Lord Harrison, the king's press secretary, nodded in agreement. The opposition parties are already calling for hearings about royal protocols and succession planning. If we don't get ahead of this story, it's going to become a constitutional crisis. King Edmund slumped in his chair, looking older than his 55 years. What kind of statement can we possibly make? My wife has essentially accused my daughter-in-law of being unworthy of an honor that I personally bestowed upon her. How do we spin that into anything positive? We focus on unity and moving forward, Sir William suggested. We emphasize that different perspectives within the family are natural and healthy, but that ultimately everyone supports the monarchy's mission to serve the people. But even as they crafted careful statements about family unity, the situation was spiraling beyond their control. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting both sides. Team Catherine and Team Isabel began trending, with citizens of Valdoria taking sides in what was becoming a very public royal feud. The international press picked up the story, with newspapers in neighboring kingdoms running headlines about instability in Valdoria's royal family. Foreign correspondents began arriving in the capital, eager to cover what was shaping up to be one of the most dramatic royal scandals in recent memory. Queen Isabel, watching the coverage from her private study, felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. She had successfully shifted the narrative away from her own humiliation and onto questions about Catherine's worthiness and the king's judgment. But she also recognized that she had unleashed forces that might be difficult to control. Lady Margaret entered the study without knocking, something she only did in times of crisis. "Your Majesty, I think you need to see this." She handed Isabel a tablet displaying the latest opinion polls. The numbers were devastating. Public approval for Queen Isabel had dropped 15 points overnight, while support for Princess Catherine had actually increased. More troubling, approval for the monarchy as a whole had declined for the first time in King Edmund's reign. "The people see you as attacking a popular princess," Margaret said quietly. "They don't understand the palace politics or the historical precedents. They just see a young woman who works with charities being criticized by her mother-in-law." Isabel set down the tablet, her confidence wavering for the first time since this conflict began. "I didn't expect such a strong reaction. I thought people would appreciate concerns about maintaining traditions. Your Majesty, with respect, you've been surrounded by courtiers and advisors for so long that you may have lost touch with what ordinary citizens care about. They don't care about historical precedents or royal protocols. They care about someone who visits their sick children in hospitals and helps rebuild their communities after floods." As night fell over the kingdom, emergency meetings were taking place in government buildings, news stations, and private homes throughout Valdoria. The royal family, which had been a symbol of stability and continuity for generations, suddenly looked fragile and divided. In the palace, family members retreated to their separate quarters. Communication between them reduced to formal, written messages delivered by staff. The warm, if sometimes complicated, relationships that had characterized the royal family were now replaced by suspicion, hurt, and carefully calculated moves in a game that none of them had truly wanted to play. The kingdom held its breath, wondering if their royal family would survive this crisis intact, or if the foundation of their monarchy was beginning to crumble under the weight of personal ambitions and ancient rivalries. The crisis deepened when investigative journalist Marcus Webb published an explosive article in the Valdoria Independent that sent fresh shockwaves through the already reeling monarchy. Webb had spent years cultivating sources within the palace, and his latest piece revealed details about the royal family's internal dynamics that no one expected to become public knowledge. The article, titled "The Crown's Hidden Power Struggle," detailed a pattern of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that painted a picture of Queen Isabel as far more politically active than the public had ever realized. Webb revealed that she had been quietly building alliances with key members of Parliament, influential business leaders, and foreign diplomats, essentially creating her own power base independent of the king's official government. Most damaging of all, the article included quotes from unnamed palace sources suggesting that Queen Isabel had been planning to establish herself as a more prominent figure in international relations, potentially overshadowing traditional diplomatic protocols that required the king to take the lead in foreign affairs. The Queen has been operating what amounts to a shadow diplomatic network, one anonymous source told Webb. She's been meeting with foreign ambassadors, discussing trade agreements, and even weighing in on military matters without always coordinating with His Majesty's official advisors. Princess Catherine read the article in stunned silence in her private apartment. The implications were staggering. If even half of Webb's reporting was accurate, it suggested that Queen Isabel's anger about the Order of the Golden Crown was about much more than personal recognition. It was about a broader struggle for influence and control within the monarchy itself. "This changes everything," Prince Alexander said, pacing around their sitting room with the newspaper in his hand. "If Mother has really been conducting unauthorized diplomatic activities, it's not just inappropriate, it could be considered treasonous under royal law." Catherine felt sick to her stomach. "Alexander, this is your mother we're talking about. Surely there's an explanation that doesn't involve treason." "I don't know anymore," Alexander replied, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I thought I knew who she was, but this article describes someone I barely recognize. Someone willing to undermine the very foundations of constitutional monarchy for personal power." Meanwhile, in the king's private office, an emergency meeting was underway that would determine the immediate future of the royal family.
King Edmund sat at the head of a polished oak table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors.
The atmosphere was tense, with everyone aware that they were potentially discussing the future of the monarchy itself. Sir William placed a folder of documents on the table before the king. "Your Majesty, we've been investigating the claims in Webb's article. I'm afraid we found evidence that supports many of his allegations." Edmund's face was pale as he opened the folder. Inside were copies of correspondence between Queen Isabel and various foreign officials, meeting schedules that had never been cleared through proper channels, and even financial records showing that she had been using royal funds to support her unauthorized activities. "How long has this been going on?" the king asked quietly. "Based on what we've found so far, at least 2 years," Sir William replied. "Possibly longer. The Queen has been very careful to cover her tracks, but some of these activities left paper trails that we were eventually able to follow." Lord Harrison, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. "Your Majesty, we need to consider the constitutional implications of this situation. If the Queen has indeed been conducting unauthorized diplomatic activities, Parliament may demand a formal investigation. That could lead to calls for her removal from royal duties, or worse." The king closed the folder and stared out the window at the palace gardens, where tourists continued to take photographs, blissfully unaware of the crisis unfolding behind the palace walls. "What do you recommend?" "We need to confront Her Majesty directly," Sir William said. "Get her version of events before the situation spirals completely out of control. If she can provide explanations for these activities, we might be able to contain the damage. If not..." He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood the implications. That evening, King Edmund requested a private meeting with Queen Isabel in his personal study. It was the first time they had been alone together since their argument 3 days earlier, and the tension between them was palpable from the moment she entered the room. Isabel was dressed impeccably as always, but Edmund could see the strain around her eyes and the careful way she held herself, as if preparing for battle. She took a seat across from his desk without waiting to be asked, a small gesture of defiance that didn't go unnoticed. "I assume you want to discuss Mr. Webb's article," she said. Before Edmund could speak, "I want to discuss whether the allegations in that article are true," Edmund replied, his voice steady but cold. Isabel was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh her options. Finally, she spoke with a directness that surprised him. "Some of them are true. I have been meeting with foreign officials, and yes, I have been discussing matters of state without always coordinating with your office." Edmund felt his heart sink, even though he had been expecting this admission. "Isabel, do you understand what you're saying? Do you understand the constitutional crisis you've created? I understand that I've been trying to serve this kingdom in ways that your advisors apparently found threatening," she replied, her voice rising slightly. "Everything I did was in the best interests of Valdoria. The trade agreements I helped negotiate will bring billions in revenue. The security arrangements I discussed will protect our borders. The diplomatic relationships I built will ensure our influence in regional affairs for decades to come. But you did it all without authorization." Edmund shot back. "You circumvented the established governmental processes that have kept our constitutional monarchy stable for centuries. You acted as if you were a head of state in your own right, rather than a ceremonial consort. Isabel stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking. Ceremonial consort? Is that how you see me, Edmund? After 15 years of marriage, after everything I've sacrificed for this crown, you think of me as merely ceremonial? That's what the role of queen consort is, Isabel. It's what you agreed to when you married me. You provide support, guidance, and representation, but you don't conduct independent foreign policy. Maybe that's the problem, Isabel said, her voice now deadly quiet. Maybe the role of queen consort is outdated in the modern world. Maybe it's time for this monarchy to evolve beyond the limitations of ancient protocols. The implications of her words hung in the air between them like a sword. Edmund stared at his wife, seeing perhaps for the first time the depth of her ambitions and the extent to which their marriage had become a political arrangement rather than a partnership. What are you saying, Isabel? She met his gaze directly, her chin raised in defiance. I'm saying that if you want a ceremonial wife who smiles and waves and stays quietly in the background, you married the wrong woman. I'm saying that this kingdom needs leaders who are willing to do what's necessary, even if it means challenging outdated traditions. And if Parliament demands your removal from royal duties? If they call for a formal investigation into your activities? Isabel smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Then I suppose we'll discover just how much support I've built over the past 2 years, won't we? As she left the study, King Edmund realized that his marriage, his family, and possibly his kingdom were all hanging in the balance. The woman he had loved and trusted for 15 years had become a stranger whose ambitions might destroy everything they had built together. Outside the palace walls, the citizens of Valdoria waited anxiously for news about their royal family, unaware that the crisis was far deeper and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The constitutional crisis that Queen Isabel had hinted at became reality faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours of her confrontation with King Edmund, Parliament announced an emergency session to discuss what they termed irregularities in royal protocol and potential constitutional violations. The speed of their response suggested that several members of Parliament had been waiting for an opportunity to challenge the monarchy's traditional autonomy. Prime Minister Robert Ashford, a sharp-eyed politician who had been increasingly critical of royal privileges, called for a formal inquiry into Queen Isabel's unauthorized diplomatic activities. Standing before a packed chamber, he delivered a speech that would be remembered as a turning point in Valdoria's constitutional history. The monarchy exists by the consent of the people and within the framework of our constitutional democracy, Ashford declared. When any member of the royal family operates outside that framework, regardless of their intentions, they threaten the very foundation of our governmental system. We cannot have shadow diplomacy conducted by unelected officials, no matter how well-intentioned. The opposition parties rallied behind Ashford's call for investigation, while the king's traditional supporters found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't defend Queen Isabel's actions without appearing to endorse constitutional violations, but they also couldn't abandon the monarchy without potentially destabilizing the entire government. As Parliament debated, Queen Isabel was orchestrating what would prove to be her most audacious move yet. She had spent months building relationships with key figures throughout the kingdom, and now she was ready to call in those favors. Her network included not just politicians and diplomats, but business leaders, military officers, and influential media figures who had benefited from her behind-the-scenes work. Lady Margaret watched with growing alarm as her longtime friend and employer prepared for what seemed like a battle for the soul of the monarchy itself. Your Majesty, I must urge you to consider the consequences of what you're planning. If you challenge Parliament directly, there's no going back. This could end the monarchy as we know it. Isabel, however, seemed energized by the crisis rather than daunted by it. Margaret, the monarchy has survived for centuries because it has adapted to changing times. Sometimes that adaptation requires bold action, rather than passive acceptance of others. Limitations. The Queen's bold action came in the form of a televised address to the nation that she scheduled without consulting King Edmund or his advisors. When the palace staff learned of her plans just hours before the broadcast, chaos erupted behind the palace walls. She can't do this, Sir William told King Edmund frantically. A queen consort doesn't address the nation independently. It's unprecedented and potentially unconstitutional. But Edmund knew his wife well enough to understand that trying to stop her at this point would only escalate the conflict further. Let her speak, he said wearily. At this point, we need to hear what she has to say as much as anyone else does. That evening, Queen Isabel appeared on television screens throughout Valdoria, seated in the palace's formal library, surrounded by centuries of royal history. She was dressed in a deep blue gown that conveyed both authority and approachability, and her demeanor was confident yet respectful. My fellow citizens, she began, I come before you tonight not just as your queen, but as someone who has dedicated her life to serving this great kingdom. Recent events have raised questions about my activities and my role within our monarchy. I believe you deserve to hear the truth directly from me. For the next 20 minutes, Queen Isabel delivered a masterful performance that reframed the entire narrative surrounding the crisis. She acknowledged her unauthorized, diplomatic activities but presented them as necessary, actions taken to protect Valdoria's interest when official channels proved too slow or too constrained by bureaucratic protocols, when our northern provinces faced economic collapse due to trade disputes. I worked directly with foreign ministers to negotiate emergency agreements that saved thousands of jobs, she explained. When neighboring kingdoms sought to exclude Valdoria from crucial security arrangements, I built relationships that ensured our voice was heard. When investment opportunities arose that could transform our economy, I acted quickly to secure Valdoria's position. She provided specific examples of her successes, detailing how her behind-the-scenes work had resulted in billions in new investment, thousands of new jobs, and enhanced security arrangements that protected the kingdom from regional instability. The case she made was compelling. Even her critics had to admit that her unauthorized activities had produced tangible benefits for the kingdom. But the most shocking moment came near the end of her address when she directly challenged the constitutional limitations placed on the monarchy. The world has changed dramatically since our constitutional framework was established, she said, looking directly into the camera. In an era of global communication, rapid economic shifts, and complex international relationships, can we really afford to maintain governmental structures that prevent quick, decisive action? Should the monarchy be limited to ceremonial functions, while real power rests with politicians who may not have the kingdom's long-term interests at heart? The implications of her words were staggering. Queen Isabel was essentially calling for a fundamental restructuring of Valdoria's government that would give the monarchy greater executive power. It was either a brilliant political gambit or a catastrophic miscalculation that could destroy the constitutional balance that had maintained peace and prosperity for generations. Public reaction was immediate and polarizing. Supporters flooded social media with praise for the Queen's honesty and courage, arguing that she had proven herself more effective than the elected officials who had been criticizing her. Critics condemned her speech as an attempted power grab that threatened democratic principles. Princess Catherine watched the address from her apartment with Prince Alexander, both of them stunned by the Queen's boldness. She's essentially declared war on the entire governmental system, Catherine said quietly. Alexander nodded grimly. And she's put my father in an impossible position. If he supports her, he's endorsing constitutional violations. If he opposes her, he's choosing the government over his own wife. In Parliament, emergency sessions continued late into the night as legislators grappled with a crisis unlike anything in the kingdom's modern history. Some called for Queen Isabel's immediate removal from all royal duties, while others argued that her results justified her methods. Prime Minister Ashford found himself facing the most complex political challenge of his career. Public opinion polls taken immediately after the Queen's address showed the kingdom almost evenly split between those who supported her vision of an empowered monarchy and those who saw her actions as dangerous overreach. King Edmund spent the night alone in his study, staring at portraits of his ancestors and wondering if he would be remembered as the monarch who presided over the destruction of the constitutional system they had helped create. The woman he had married 15 years earlier had become a force that threatened to reshape not just their family, but their entire kingdom. As dawn broke over the palace, it was clear that the crisis had moved far beyond questions of personal recognition or family dynamics. Queen Isabel had transformed a dispute over a ceremonial honor into a fundamental challenge to the balance of power that had defined Valdoria for centuries. The kingdom waited anxiously to see whether their constitutional monarchy would survive this unprecedented challenge, or whether they were witnessing the birth of something entirely new and potentially dangerous. The resolution came from an unexpected source and in a way that no one had anticipated. 3 days after Queen Isabel's dramatic televised address, it was Princess Catherine who stepped forward with a proposal that would ultimately save both the monarchy and the kingdom from constitutional chaos. Catherine had spent those 3 days in intense discussions with constitutional scholars, political advisors, and surprisingly with Queen Isabel herself. Despite the tension between them, both women recognized that their conflict had spiraled into something that threatened everything they both claimed to care about. "I have a proposal," Catherine announced at an emergency family meeting that included King Edmund, Queen Isabel, Prince Alexander, and the kingdom's top advisors. "But it will require all of us to set aside our pride and focus on what's truly best for Valdoria." The meeting took place in the palace's ancient council chamber, where kings and queens had made momentous decisions for over 400 years. The weight of history seemed to press down on everyone present as Catherine outlined her plan. "Queen Isabel is right about one thing," Catherine began, causing several people to shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The world has changed and our monarchy needs to evolve to remain relevant and effective. But Prime Minister, Ashford is also right that we cannot have unauthorized diplomatic activities that bypass constitutional processes." Catherine's proposal was elegant in its simplicity and revolutionary in its implications. She suggested the creation of a new formal role within the monarchy, the Royal Envoy for International Relations. This position would give Queen Isabel official authority to conduct the diplomatic activities she had been doing unofficially, but with proper oversight and coordination with the government. "The Queen has proven her effectiveness in international relations," Catherine continued. "Rather than punishing her for unauthorized activities, we should acknowledge her talents and create a framework that allows her to use them legally and constitutionally." The proposal included several key provisions. Queen Isabel would retain her traditional role as queen consort, but would also serve as royal envoy, with her diplomatic activities coordinated through the foreign ministry. All meetings and agreements would be properly documented and reported to Parliament. The role would be reviewed annually to ensure it remained within constitutional bounds. Most importantly, Catherine suggested that the Order of the Golden Crown should be modified to create different categories of recognition, one for traditional long-term service, and another for innovative contributions to the kingdom's welfare. This would allow both styles of royal service to be properly honored without diminishing either approach. King Edmund was the first to speak after Catherine finished her presentation. "This proposal has merit, but it would require constitutional amendments that Parliament would have to approve. Are you confident they would accept such changes?" Catherine nodded. "I've been in preliminary discussions with several parliamentary leaders. The moderate members of both parties are looking for a solution that addresses the constitutional concerns while acknowledging the Queen's contributions. Prime Minister Ashford has indicated privately that he could support a framework that brings these activities under proper governmental oversight." Queen Isabel had been silent throughout Catherine's presentation, but now she spoke carefully. "This proposal would formalize my role and give me the authority I believe is necessary to serve the kingdom effectively. It would also require me to work within governmental structures rather than around them." She paused, looking directly at Catherine. "I appreciate the wisdom and generosity you've shown in crafting this solution. It was the closest thing to an apology that anyone expected to hear from Queen Isabel, and Catherine accepted it with grace. We're family, and families find ways to work together even when they disagree." The implementation of Catherine's proposal took several weeks of intense negotiation between the palace, Parliament, and constitutional experts. Queen Isabel's supporters in business and diplomatic circles rallied behind the plan, arguing that formalizing her role would benefit the kingdom's international standing. Even some of her critics acknowledged that her results had been impressive, even if her methods had been problematic. The constitutional amendments passed Parliament by a narrow margin, with Prime Minister Ashford playing a crucial role in building support among moderate members. In a speech before the final vote, he acknowledged that sometimes constitutional frameworks must evolve to accommodate both changing circumstances and exceptional talents. Queen Isabel's formal appointment as Royal Envoy for International Relations was announced, On a sunny morning 6 weeks after the original ceremony that had started the entire crisis. This time, the announcement was made jointly by King Edmund and Prime Minister Ashford, emphasizing the cooperative nature of the new arrangement. Princess Catherine stood beside Queen Isabel during the ceremony, and their public display of unity helped heal much of the damage that had been done to the royal family's reputation. The Order of the Golden Crown was also modified as Catherine had suggested, with the Queen receiving the new category of recognition for constitutional innovation in service to the Crown. The personal relationships within the royal family took longer to heal than the constitutional crisis. King Edmund and Queen Isabel's marriage had been fundamentally changed by the revelations about her unauthorized activities and her willingness to challenge his authority. They began attending counseling sessions to rebuild trust and communication, though it would be months before they regained the partnership they had once shared. Prince Alexander's relationship with his mother was also strained by her willingness to manipulate family dynamics for political advantage. However, his respect for Catherine's role in resolving the crisis brought the family closer together in other ways. Catherine's wisdom and diplomatic skills had proven invaluable, earning her a new level of respect from all family members. The kingdom's citizens ultimately viewed the crisis as a sign that their monarchy was capable of growth and adaptation rather than being trapped by ancient traditions. Public approval for the royal family actually increased over time, as people appreciated their willingness to find innovative solutions to complex problems. Queen Isabel thrived in her new role as royal envoy, successfully negotiating several major international agreements that brought significant benefits to Valdoria. Her work was now properly coordinated with government officials and subject to parliamentary oversight, but she retained the autonomy she needed to be effective. Princess Catherine continued her charitable work, but also became more involved in constitutional and governmental matters. Her success in resolving the royal crisis established her as a significant figure in her own right, someone whose judgment and diplomatic skills were valued by all parties. 1 year after the crisis began, the royal family gathered again in the palace ballroom for the annual honor ceremony. This time the atmosphere was very different. The tension and rivalry that had nearly destroyed the monarchy had been replaced by a more mature understanding of each person's role and contributions. As King Edmund prepared to present that year's honors, he reflected on how close they had come to disaster, and how much they had all learned about the importance of communication, respect, and adaptation. The monarchy had not just survived its greatest crisis in generations, it had emerged stronger and more relevant than ever. The Kingdom of Valdoria had learned that even ancient institutions could evolve and grow, that family conflicts could be transformed into opportunities for positive change, and that sometimes the greatest crises led to the most important breakthroughs. Queen Isabel's ambition, Princess Catherine's wisdom, and King Edmund's steady leadership had combined to create something new. A modern monarchy that honored tradition while embracing innovation, a royal family that had learned to turn conflict into cooperation, and a constitutional system that proved flexible enough to accommodate change without losing its essential character. The crown jewels continued to sparkle under the ballroom chandeliers, but they now represented something slightly different than they had before. Not just the weight of tradition, but the promise of a future where ancient institutions could adapt to serve the needs of a changing world.